All right, three, two, one. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. Her name is Roberta Glass. She runs the True Crime Report on YouTube. And last time we talked, we chatted about some of the events. It was March 30th was our last interview. We talked about Bob Ruff's investigation, or fantasia, or fantastical investigation into the West Memphis Three. And in the interim, we're going to talk tonight about NXIVM, this cult that's popped up. It was headed by Keith Raniere. But I had talked with one of the kind of main known observers of NXIVM from the outside. His name was Frank Parlato. You guys can listen to that on my YouTube channel or my Spreaker channel. That was from April 28th, 2018. But Roberta, are you there?
Yeah, thanks.
Right. Awesome. Thanks for being here. So, we have we did a lot of talking before the show. But we have a lot of things have developed since the last time we've talked. There were arrests of Bronfman, one of the daughters of the very wealthy Bronfman spirits or alcohol family, and Nancy Salzman, somebody who had talked to Frank Parlato about that was happening. And it's great that you're able to be here on the show because you have firsthand experience looking at some of these trials down in New York. Can you first, maybe you can, for people who don't know your name, talk a little bit about your background and interest in true crime, and also what your experience is watching these NXIVM trials.
I live in New York. I'm a true crime fan. I started recording just like little audio pieces on YouTube and Spreaker about different crime cases, with a heavy interest in the West Memphis Three, and also in the way that a murder case is spun, when PR gets involved. And so I started covering NXIVM, and I went to Keith Raniere's bail hearing, which was incredible because of how unusual the bail package was. And
how was that unusual?
Well, for one, first of all, Keith Raniere, the cult is 20 years old, and Claire Bronfman is said to have put $100 million into it. So, but Keith Raniere himself says he has no income, and the only thing he owns is half of a property in Albany, New York, which is the headquarters for the cult. So he's saying, and when he was arrested in Mexico with all this encrypted devices around him, with a sort of vague reason why he was there, and a lot of women around him, including Allison Mack. Right. So it just didn't look good. It looked like he was fleeing. He had gone to Mexico to flee this possible future arrest. So that was one thing. He was an obvious flight risk from that. And secondly, he didn't want to he offered $100 million, I believe that $10 million bail. I'm sorry, $10 million bail. But he said it was coming from a trust. And Keith Raniere has this really smooth talking, charismatic, kind of like a Park Avenue, Better Call Saul type, no one you would want watching your wallet while you went to the bathroom type lawyer. You know what I mean?
Was that Mark Agnifilo?
Yes.
Okay, so he was there. So, and the reason I know his name is you had told me about an interview featuring Agnifilo being interviewed by Megyn Kelly. So I watched that last night, so we can reference that later too.
Right. So, but the very interesting part of this bail package was Keith Raniere was going to be protected by armed guards. And that was the sticking point for the judge. The judge was saying, well, are these armed guards to keep critics out or to keep Keith Raniere from fleeing? And if Keith Raniere did flee, and, we know that he has the support to maybe do that,
right,
from powerful people like Claire Bronfman, who wasn't indicted yet.
Right, at that time. He also, the reason he fled to Mexico is also he had a network in Mexico as well that led up to Carlos Salinas' son, if I remember correctly, one of the former presidents.
Right, and the really interesting article came out about that today, saying that he wanted to make him president of Mexico so that Keith Raniere could rule Mexico secretly.
Right, so the son of Carlos Salinas would be Mexico. That was in the Daily Beast, correct?
Yes,
Gotcha.
yeah. So, but what's interesting about the armed guards, so I kept just meditating on this armed guards, and I was listening back to that clip. It's a really famous clip of Raniere talking to 3 women and schooling them about their kind of defects of knowledge, not knowing how things work the way he did. You know that clip?
Yes.
And at the end of it, he says, I've been shot at for my beliefs. And then he says, I've had to contemplate whether to get guards, armed or not.
Right.
So it's really from him. That idea of armed guards has to be from Keith Raniere to feed his ego. That I believe that he thinks that he was indicted because he's too powerful, too dangerous, too unconventional, too effective for the man, meaning America, Right.
So, yeah.
And it's just another way to feed his ego to say that he's like a super important man and that he needs armed guards because his ideas are too powerful.
And so he was saying, his attorney was saying that you were inside the courtroom, right?
Yeah, right.
So his attorney is saying that to the judge. And did you get any read from the judge about how?
The judge was asking questions, saying, well, what is the purpose? Is it to keep? And he says, well, it achieves both. And he really couldn't articulate why these armed guards were going to be effective and could they shoot or not. If Keith Raniere fled, did they have the authority to shoot him? And it was really to make everybody comfortable. I think that was one of his arguments. But he just got really tied up in it. And then he said at one point, the armed guards are really just the icing on the cake. Just forget about those armed guards and get back to something else. And then they were talking about the trust, which was really just a front for Claire Bronfman. Gotcha. And so they started referencing her without saying her name. So,
gotcha. Yeah. Interesting. And so then that was actually that whole, 10 million bail was denied, and he was just basically thrown in jail and still there to this day. So he never achieved a bail. Mac herself got, I think her parents put up the $5 million, or really a huge bail amount. So she's out. And
an ankle monitor, too. Most of them have ankle monitors. Almost all of them do.
Yeah, so, I think that's the same thing with, what's his name? What's the guy who was the rapist out there? Weinstein. I think Weinstein paid $10 million or something. I forgot what his bail was. Yeah, it's huge. Huge numbers. So, what were your thoughts about the prosecutor? The prosecutors are in there making that argument to the judge to have no bail. What was your view of the New York prosecutors? And was Schneiderman still around at that bail hearing, or did he fall to the Me Too movement? I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't think he was. I don't remember. He's not the one that sticks out in my mind. I don't think so. The 3 prosecutors were junior, sort of the 3 female junior prosecutors.
Interesting.
So they come in their sort of Ann Taylor suits, really earnest and really. They look like they could be NXIVM members, which is it's like a made-for-TV movie, and they all have long dark hair, and they have been really effective. My fear is that they're not street savvy enough to deal with one Claire Bronfman's attorney, who's like a Leslie Abramson type.
Gotcha.
Really aggressive, really smart, and there's some issues, I guess, about none of the defendants are allowed to talk to each other. So what was brought up was that they were communicating using third parties and possibly intimidating witnesses. And so Keith Ranieri's lawyer stood up in the, I don't know, is the word swarmy? Swarmiest fashion. It was like, listen, I'm almost like I'm offended at the accusation that I would do anything immoral.
Yeah, smarmy. Yeah.
Is that right? Smarmy.
Yeah,
and people in front of me were shaking their heads and laughing because it was such a
like a faked fame,
his morality, and trying to just play up his morality. And then Susan Nichols, who's Claire Bronfman's, the Leslie Abramson type-esque lawyer, said, listen, all you have to do if you think that's happening is come talk to me. Like, that is the most manipulative argument too. They're really foxy.
Well, I mean, the prosecutors there are really, I mean, those three may be just a front for a savvier, hopefully more experienced prosecutorial head, but they're dealing with a multi-headed hydra above the surface, and then underneath the surface, the tentacles go everywhere. I mean, there are rumors about trafficking people from Libya, which, some people have discounted, but, human trafficking. And we know that indictment was about trafficking children under the age of 14. And I think that it's also remarkable, and I think that I haven't found any facts to contradict my position, which is they haven't leaked about who those kids are, where they're from. Nothing has come out of the prosecutor's office, and I don't think anything's come from any of the defendants about the particular details about who these victims are. Have you heard anything about that?
No.
Yeah.
And I think it won't be disclosed. If it, it'll probably be, I would think it would.
Like John Doe, Jane Doe, yeah. But I think that it's still remarkable. I'm so used to things leaking out or somebody third party saying something that there's still some elements to these cases that haven't come out. So, and when you were there, did you see, what was the media presence like?
A lot of women covering it. I met, forgetting I think her first name is Melissa Roberta, and she's covering Nexium for Radar Online, which is one of my guilty pleasures. And we talked a lot about Allison Mack, who, well, the first time that I went in, I was really intimidated because I'd never been in I've been in like family court supporting a friend of mine in her divorce, and I'd never been in a big courtroom, and you have to check your phone, and the underwire in my bra was like sending off the alarm, it was nerve-wracking. So I get there kind of like right at the last minute, and I look and there's like one seat left in the front row, and I was like, oh wow, I'm not shy, I'll go sit in a great seat, I'll sit in the front. And I look up, and I'm sitting super close to Allison Mack.
Wow, interesting. But
she's so gray and kind of horsey, like she either photographs incredibly well, she's incredibly photogenic, or she's just kind of deteriorated from eating 800 calories and having her soul sucked by Keith Raniere and Nexium,
and the dread of the future. I mean, her charges are grim. I mean, I don't know who's talking or what's going on, but the charges against her are not, probation if she gets convicted.
She's very strange. She's just, you can't get there's kind of like no, I don't know, human. She looks disassociated.
Interesting.
And like she doesn't realize the trouble she's in. And so that was my first impression, and I, made a little recording, mentioning that. But when I said, well, what do you think? When I was talking on the second time at the sort of the follow-up to Melissa Russo, she said, the first time she was here, she was cracking jokes with her lawyer. I don't know, when is she going to make this plea deal?
Right.
That's the thing. And it just, I mean, I would be running so fast if I were facing life in prison for the charges she was facing, and I would be probably, I don't know, I would be
ready to talk. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'm assuming they really want Raniere. He's the main malefactor. Maybe, I don't know how serious they are about Bronfman or Salzman, but according to some of the stories, she's really not, she's been involved in a lot of wrongdoing.
Right. She was known as Pimp Mac. She was, I believe she thought she was completely in love with Raniere. Mm-hmm. And she was getting him underage girls, and she was very active in the DOS, the branding portion of Jeunesse, the quote-unquote Orwellian titled Women's Empowerment part of NXIVM. But I think I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. You know what? An interesting observation is that a lot of women are covering the trial, but there's a very lack of men other than Raniere. Maybe this guy Carlos Slim, but it seems like it's really a majority female oriented story, because they seem to be the majority of the victims or things that have happened wrong. But I do think it's odd that it was just really Raniere who is running. There's not like it doesn't seem like he had a bunch of henchmen other than women.
There was a male group, and it was called the Society of Protectors.
Oh, gotcha.
And that was his men's touchy-feely group. But I don't know a lot. You're right. Nobody knows a lot about what the men's role was, besides kind of being his proxy to rule Mexico, Gotcha. But the thing, I just remembered what I wanted to say about Allison Mack that's not really it's getting reported incorrectly.
Okay.
Which is, she was under pressure to take the fall for DOS before all these indictments came down. That was like the rumor going around, that she should take the fall because that was the ethical. This NXIVM loves to use the word ethical while doing the most unethical things.
Right. It's like Scientology. That's a huge word in Scientology too. Ethics.
Right. I mean, everything Raniere did was an idea of someone else's. Even his nickname Vanguard was from his favorite video game. I mean, how lame is that?
Wow,
I mean, the guy had zero originality. Anyway, so
just to cut in too, DOS stands for Dominus Obsequious. What is? Oh God, I just lost it. Dominus Obsequious Sororium, Lord over the obedient female companions. That's the acronym. So sorry, just wanted to explain that. You still there?
Yeah. Just what you think of. Just what you think of when you think of women's empowerment.
Right, right. And we can go forward about Agnifilo talking with Megyn Kelly, saying that's something women wanted to do, and he's going to prove it in trial, actually, that DOS was fully 100% consensual, female relationship, getting branded with a laser that hurt for 30 minutes or something like that. So.
Right. So that connects a little bit with what I'm saying about Allison Mack, is she said the branding was her idea because it's just like a tattoo. If a tattoo burned off your flesh and people had to hold you down while you got a tattoo, and you were told to think of your master while you got a tattoo, that maybe would be more like it. But it's, that's what she told the New York Times, that was her inspiration for the branding part. Wow. But they, so the press just went around saying, "Oh, Allison Mack, this was her idea. The branding was her idea." But that's the story. And the lawyer, the Megyn Kelly interview, Raniere's lawyer said that he has 5 witnesses to say that DOS was all done from their ideas.
Right.
Raniere.
Agnifilo. Mark Agnifilo was his name.
Agnifilo, sorry.
That's right. So that was a very recent interview, that Megyn Kelly interview, right?
Yes.
It was within the last 2 or 3 days. So she started off with she was talking to Catherine Oxenberg, whose daughter, India Oxenberg, is involved. And Catherine Oxenberg's book about NXIVM just dropped within 2 days ago, which is titled Captive, A Mother's Crusade to save her daughter from a terrifying cult. And she had some very interesting inside information that I hadn't heard before, about people in Mexico. This is the Mexican tide saying, do not publicly name me or I'll be killed. And she flat out says he wasn't joking. Not only was he referencing the cult's potential power in Mexico because it was populated with so many of the country's rich, famous, and most elite citizens, but he was also acknowledging the danger that one of those citizens was Emiliano Salinas. His father, Carlos, the most feared man in the country, would do anything for his son. So, there's some high-stakes things happening, definitely. But India, that was really the Megyn Kelly interview, was Catherine Oxenberg. And then they cut away, talked to Agnifilo, Megyn Kelly did, and then returned to somebody who I think has been around the cult kind of field, Rick Allen Ross, talking about the cults. And I thought that he had some involvement with NXIVM.
He was sued by NXIVM.
Yes,
he had the pleasure of being sued by NXIVM, yeah.
So, and I think it was a really grueling lawsuit that he endured with them.
Yeah.
I think that they really, dragged him through the brambles, so to speak. And I don't think he actually came out ahead. I think he was very expensive. And so, it's kind of a terrible story that she didn't bring up. Megyn Kelly didn't bring that aspect up in the interview, which I think was a mistake. But
Can I mention one thing about Catherine Oxenberg,
yes,
who's at every hearing and who I really admire. She's a really
are you seeing her there at the hearings?
Every hearing.
Oh, okay. So how many hearings total have you gone to?
2.
Okay,
Two, but I know that
okay.
she's at every one.
Okay.
The ones that I missed, she's there. She's really on it. This is because she wanted to get her daughter back. So, and she is incredibly well connected person, right? And
she's a literal princess, I think, if I remember.
Right. She was on Dynasty, and she's well spoken, and she's also sympathetic. So right as her book drops, her daughter is branded and not talking to her, and in the cult, right when this book comes out with all this publicity, Simon & Schuster book, her daughter comes back to her and says she's moved on from NXIVM.
Yeah.
So was that a negotiation? Not to, was there a negotiation that happened? Like, I'm
gonna take stuff out of my book if you give me my.
To release her.
Right. She might have had more information than she put in her book and used that as leverage. Who knows?
I wonder why nobody was asking that question. How did that happen? Like, what happened? Right.
I mean, it's an important question. How did that happen so fast when she's been trying to get her back for like a decade, right? I mean, it's been a long time.
My dad wrote something for Goldie Hawn, and she's just really like kind of smart but flaky kind of. That's what that's kind of what I remember.
Ditzy.
So I wasn't surprised by that.
Yeah,
and she has like that. She has that weird kind of like morally vague quality that didn't surprise me.
Gotcha. Yeah. So Oxenberg dropped that book. She was on this TV show. And what was the second? When did you go to the second hearing? What was that about? Was that the decision on bail?
Yeah. So this was a follow-up. So Keith Raniere is the only one in jail, and he had some interesting habits in jail. He's in the kind of like pedophile wing, A, because it's such a high-profile trial, and B, because he's a pedophile. So he loves eating like the horrible jail food, and he's always there on time. But he also had this like really annoying to the jail habit of getting bored and faking ailments. So he got in trouble, and they told him he couldn't go to the clinic anymore. So when I saw him the first time, he looks like a cross between Charles Manson and like a self-helpy, effeminate, like John Gray or something with a, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, he has his does he have his glasses on and everything?
No, he looks like greasy. He looked really greasy and ape-like when I saw him.
What's his ethnicity? Do you know his background at all? Or I mean, you know he's from New York somewhere, but do you know his... What's that?
He's from Albany
Albany's from
area of
Albany.
New York.
Is he Italian? Is that what Ranieri is? Is Italian?
Yeah. I would think so.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know
I
either.
just don't know.
Is he French? I don't know.
He's just such an epic myth maker that, like so many cult leaders are, that it's interesting. The people who grew up with him said that he was always wanting to brag about his intellect and his abilities, even as like a 14, 15-year-old.
Interesting.
And that he was sexually rejected a lot by women. But NXIVM is really so much about like sucking off women's energy and, not honoring their boundaries, and like all the women are encouraged to, even if that's not their sexuality, to sleep with other women. So an interesting thing about India Oxenberg is that Claire Bronfman wanted her to be her slave, and India Oxenberg rejected her.
Oh,
and Alison Mack became her slave mistress or whatever. So Claire Bronfman, oh God, there's so many interesting dynamics in the court. I mean, Claire Bronfman comes in with like, kind of like just a sense, you really don't doubt that she grew up with tons of entitlements. And when people talk to her, she will continue to sit while they like squat down next to her.
Interesting. So she like commands authority or something.
Yeah. And the second time I saw Keith Raniere, he looked really excited to be there and really excited about the attention. I don't know if he's just happy to have company. And to be such a big trial, the judge said at one point, we're going to need some more chairs, because all the NXIVM lawyers and defendants, even though two of them were missing, were having trouble fitting on the defense side of a very large courtroom. And Nancy Saltzman did this really odd thing where she didn't want to sit at the table. She was still in the court section of the thing, but like as if she were a watcher. You know what I'm saying? Like sitting facing the judge instead of sitting sideways facing the prosecution.
Interesting. So she wanted to stare him down or something?
I think she feels like she's not really a defendant. Like she's really, just an
observer or something, or just
an observer, not really in it.
Well, that was back then, though, right? So now it's different.
No, that was when she was indicted.
Oh, wow! So even then, so
the rest of the defendants were at the defense table, and she was sitting in this. I don't know if she couldn't fit; she didn't have enough chairs, but she sat there pretty early on, and I went right away to the bathroom, and she was sitting outside with her lawyer, and she has all of them have such a hard look to their face. I thought to myself that I was like in the evil league of evil with these people.
That's interesting.
And I mean, Claire Bronfman, if she were cast on a CSI or something as someone who had her husband murdered, it would be like from Central Casting. Wow. They're really dark, but Keith Raniere the second time had this thing like he wasn't at a hearing for the things that he was indicted for. It was like he was there because he was maybe negotiating a book deal, or you know what I mean, at a press conference, kind of like no sense of worry, very looking. He always likes to look around. He's always trying to make eye contact with the other defendants. And there was one very interesting moment where Alison Mack was sitting, facing forward with her elbows and palms on the table, and Claire Bronfman and Nancy Saltzman and her lawyers stood behind her and had a little, meeting really close to her. Kind of a way to tell her she wasn't in it. So I don't know if they're putting pressure on her to take the fall, or if they're mad at her because they know she is going to make a deal. I don't know. It was very odd. It was like high school, and it seemed like they were trying to make her feel, not in it, not in the group. Yes, not in the clique. She's no longer in the clique.
Well, I mean, she's living at home. I got to think her parents are working on her. Like, come on, you're not going to jail for 20 years. She's got all the information, so I would think that They should all be terrified that that's going to happen. And then what? Claire Bronfman, Kathy Russell, Lauren Salzman, and Nancy Salzman all were arrested within the last couple weeks, right? Or 3 weeks?
Yeah. The hearing I was at, two of them, Lauren Salzman and Kathy Russell, weren't there. They were coming the next day to work out the details of their bail. So the hearing I was at, the purpose was to see if the October start date for the trial was realistic. And the defense said that these three prosecutors who look so earnest and like they're working so hard, they're going through 60 encrypted devices.
Wow.
In discovery. And they stood up for themselves. They said, we really object to the defense calling us slow and insinuating that we're incompetent. So I was like, you really root for these three young, pretty lawyers, Right. You just hope that I keep thinking that they should hire a ex-con man to help them with strategy, because I don't know if they're really street savvy enough to deal with some of the stuff that's going to happen from the other side.
I wouldn't be surprised if in those 60 encrypted devices there's information and things that they're using mob terminology or cult language to explain things, or Podesta language to communicate things that aren't clear. I wouldn't be surprised at all if if these prosecutors don't know some of that lingo. They might not grasp the totality of what these guys are up to.
These prosecutors know they refer to NXIVM as a criminal empire when they do refer to it.
Wow.
And that's a really good description.
That's amazing. And that's unlike what we were talking about before the interview, which was the New York Times letter that the New York Times, and just another kind of mass fail by the New York Times writing about NXIVM. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So my understanding was that this New York Times Magazine cover story was orchestrated by Claire Bronfman as a way to put out positive press so that these indictments wouldn't happen. But the timing was all messed up. So this love letter to NXIVM saying how amazing the ideas it was and how incredible the people were, and how even the people who were critics said that it really worked, or parts of it were helpful. And, the most defining characteristic of NXIVM is that it's a cult, that it does all the things that it's exploitative. Nobody goes into NXIVM and comes out better, right. No matter how many positive things. And there really aren't any original ideas in it. I mean, I know that Scientology, does Freud again, but at least it's a little bit more original. If you listen to those interviews with Keith Raniere and Allison Mack, I challenge you to understand what the heck he's saying. If there's any meaning in those words, it's just ethical, like these sort of
self-empowerment buzzwords. Get all those things in.
Authentic,
the real you,
jumbled together,
improvement,
arranged.
Well, I think Rick Allen Ross on that Megyn Kelly interview said undue influence. That was really kind of the key phrase they kept using was NXIVM is imposing undue influence on all these different people.
That's the new word for brainwashing. Right. I mean, remember after Jonestown in the 70s? I grew up, in the 80s, and there was a real awareness of cults and them being dangerous, and you kind of heard a few stories about maybe your parents' friend's child who, had to be kidnapped maybe. It was like right. I don't know, it was in the consciousness, the
well, there
air.
was so many horror stories, right? It was like the
horror stories.
Liberation Army and Jim Jones. Yeah.
Right. And then I don't know what happened, but I think it's just so scary for the Americans to think that they wouldn't be in control of their destiny or in control of their thoughts, or, because the whole American thing is that,
rugged individualism or something, or at least that's the
right.
pretense.
Right. So, yeah, they tried to deprogram Allison Mack. That was a big failure.
Yeah, Ross talked about that, right? It takes 4 days to deprogram somebody, and that he had deprogrammed, did he say thousands or 500 or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he said there are thousands of operating cults. So
yeah, it seems like our understanding of it is not as good as it was, or in our interest, or it's like almost like you're a conspiracy theorist if you have an interest in it. I don't know. It's odd.
Well, I think well, sorry, go ahead.
So anyway, the woman who wrote it, Vanessa oh God, I always trip up on her name, Grigoriadis, I knew from when I was 16 years old at the National High School Institute program at Northwestern, which is this like super intense kind of like boot campy type program for students in the top of their class. I never forgot her. And from that she was like just stuck out so intensely for her kind of I don't know, she had a very like I don't know, she was teased a lot for not being kind of like she just seemed to diminish herself and make herself seem dumb. So I never forgot her. So she's the author of this love letter to NXIVM. I'm like, how did this happen? How did this girl who I knew when I was 16, how did she, and the whole point of the program that we were involved in was like, I don't know, Dead Poet Society meets like a, like a boot camp. And they wanted us to be like brave and questioning. And I was like, how can you not question, like how do you not know a cult when it's like staring you right in the face? She was like, they seemed really nice. They made me eggs.
That's enough.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you know the title of that New York Times Magazine article?
Oh, I don't. But the Frank Report wrote an article about Vanessa Grigoriadis and her love letter. They had the same reaction to it, like, what the heck? And so the question is was she paid by Claire Bronfman to write that?
Right. It's titled Inside NXIVM, the quote, sex cult, unquote, that preached empowerment. Why did female members follow a guru named Keith Raniere, who now stands accused of sex trafficking? ? He made them feel like they were in control. Vanessa Grigoriadis. That's a tough one.
Right, because what does it make you feel like being in control, like being starved and branded and
told you to have sex with? Can't see anybody else but the boss. Can't. Vanguard is number one. Nobody else.
Right, you can't
give me all your money.
The problem you have with NXIVM, it's a defect in you. The NXIVM and Raniere are perfect. Whatever problems you have are from you.
Right. But don't question somebody with a 220 IQ.
Isn't it amazing that he wouldn't just put himself at a level of like an Einstein, or it to be so extreme?
Right, like so over the top. Like who has a 200? Like he should have just said like 180 or 165 or something believable. No, I'm actually so far on the other end of the bell curve. I'm not on the curve.
I'm so far above like the greatest thinkers. And you know who did that too was Eccles. I mean, not to the same degree, but he likes to talk about his 150, I think it is, IQ.
Yeah, something like that. He always thinks he's smarter than everything else. I think he said that in one of his police interviews back in 1993. Like, I'm smarter than everybody else.
No, that doesn't exist. I mean, I actually had to do the IQ test recently. And anyone who has any faith in that your intelligence, I mean, some of the things are just so odd, like how fast you can put eggs in holes and stuff,
Well, IQ tests, you can question their validity and all kinds of stuff. There's definitely some questionable aspects, and you can actually learn the questions in IQ tests so that they're not novel anymore. You're not seeing them fresh. So I know this question, I know the answer. So there's ways to kind of juice it, I would think. But that's a good transition into Eccles because Bob Ruff just finished his first half, 120? I know it's 60 hours of confusing obfuscation about the West Memphis 3 case, and he says he's coming back to it. That finish, I don't know if you listened to the last one of that series, but it was a whopper. He said he made some statements that I think that he won't be able to live down. But any thoughts on the Bob Ruff Truth and Justice campaign and where it's going?
One, I want to give you your due, because when you said the last time we talked that Bob Ruff was giving himself enough rope to hang himself and that there was no way out of this podcast, I really didn't believe you. I thought that if you can magnify enough insignificant stuff and disregard enough really important stuff, that you could come up with some kind of suspect, something, end it some way. But you were right. I mean, you were right. He just had to give up.
Yeah, he just gave up and walked away. Do you think he'll come back?
Well, apparently, what is the deal with his legal trouble? Do you know any details about that?
No, it's pretty vague. I don't know what that is.
I guess I don't know if I've just. There's so much. I have right now I have 5 notebooks that I keep for my NXIVM research. So I don't know if I'm just so involved with NXIVM that I'm just relating everything in life to NXIVM. But when I hear Bob Ruff call it the Truth and Justice podcast, and I saw he was on some fire. What is it when you research a fire?
It's a fire investigator, arson investigator. Yeah, he was on some
arson investigator, low budget website as a justice advocate. It seems so close to Ranieri, where you take on the language of a moral person and twist it to use to defend child killers. And when he did that presentation where he tried to take on the kind of persona of a critic, where he was talking about how important it is we talk about the victims, right. He really did it. It rang hollow because he didn't know, besides saying we should say their name, he didn't really, he
didn't remember it, right?
There was no connection,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's very strange that, he thinks that arson investigator is enough training to figure out criminal cases. And I think he had to do those follow-ups throughout his podcast to actually correct some of the misstatements he made. I could have swore he didn't know an Alford plea was a guilty plea. And he had to go back through that one and say, oh yeah, an Alford plea is a guilty plea, I could have sworn. Did you hear that part of it?
Yeah. He had to correct a lot of things. Yeah. And his
interviews with Baldwin and Eccles were absurd. He asked so few questions. He never brought in any contradictory things. He never brought in the prosecutor's questioning of Eccles, where he caught Eccles in a lie, where he got information that he thought was in the newspaper, and then he said, oh, it's just common sense that, somebody would want to kill somebody for fun or something, a thrill kill. You remember those little statements from the court record? He just omitted those. So I'm not surprised that his people who listen to the so-called, quote, Truth and Justice podcast think that these guys are innocent because he left so much out. And I mean, the omission, what did Orwell say? Omission is the greatest form of lie. Dude, right. Yeah, it's incredible.
But my question is, how did Bob Ruff get his kind of paradigm, his worldview that every law enforcement officer is corrupt, right. Every investigation is inept, and and there's just hundreds of thousands of wrongfully convicted people right. That he's going to be for.
Is that excellent point?
Does it feed his ego? And how does he have such little compassion for victims? And how do you live your life in such a sheltered manner? Like, is it just that ambition is your defining trait, that you're willing to ignore things like typical human behavior or how the world usually runs, to believe crazy theories that are really kind of like lightning strikes, like so would happen, so like would be so hard, like certain, it's like almost like chains of events that just would be so rare.
He made up that new alibi about Miss Kelly being at the trailer park, and they were insinuating that the officer who saw who didn't see Miss Kelly at the trailer park was perjuring himself. So there's part of this larger conspiracy that the cop is involved with this great conspiracy to frame these three guys. It's hard to believe. Forgot the cop's name, but I mean, the made up alibi of Eccles is also just a whopper that doesn't, begs credulity. Well, it's off the charts.
In his take on how Miss Kelly was fed his confession.
Right. Oh,
I mean, that's ridiculous.
It's so much. And then I think he said in that I mean, I don't want to leave all this stuff out, but I mean, there's no facts that Miss Kelly got right. I mean, I think he said a totalistic statement like that, where that's not really true. He actually, the fact that Miss Kelly said that he ran after one of the boys and caught him explains how 3 people murdered 3 young boys. It fits into that, to the believability. And one of the things you got to remember, and one thing he never addressed, is that all the jury saw all the evidence that was involved in court, much of which he left out, and came to the conclusion that they did it. 2 separate juries, one for Miss Kelly and one for the other 2. So he's actually contravening the in-court decisions made in a court of law, 24 standard citizens. So he never really brings that up. How could the juries get it wrong? So it's just incredible. And I think he said in one of the podcasts that he had his faith on the justice system from 1 to 10. He would grade it as a 4, if I remember correctly. And
I would grade it as a -4.
But I mean, I think he referenced something where he had to go to court or something, or sit in a jury pool. Do you remember that? But I don't know. It was in one.
Oh, that was great. I was like, oh.
So that was kind of an insight into his attitude. And so you have an untrained person talking about all these little elements of the law that involve evidence, proper trial procedure, all of these separate rules, and leaving and omitting so much. He left out all the Satanism of Eccles, just that still continues to this day. And it's just astonishing, really, to see how brazen that process.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the quote, God give me the confidence of a mediocre man. I mean, it's so much, he thinks he's a behavioral expert. I mean, I like to think that's one of my strengths, is that, or at least interests. I don't even want to say strengths because I don't want to be compared to Bob Rupp in any way, but he says he's a behavioral expert.
Self-styled, right? Self-anointed?
I'm just saying, like, when he seems to not have any understanding of human behavior and no connection to human emotion. Like, he just recently wrote this tribute to his wife, and it was just like a little bit like Keith Raniere. I'm sorry. I really think I've gone, maybe I need a vacation from this stuff, but just too much,
Too many correlations.
Right, just like these really generic statements, like she's my best friend, like things that you hear all the time, but that with no specific details that give you a flavor for or connection to his feelings. He is just a really fascinating character because he has so much confidence. He's
so certain, Even the title of his podcast is so certain. Truth and justice, like this is it, Pravda. Right. You got it, baby.
And he has no problem, like, I guess, having people, I don't know if it's Bob Ruff himself, but throwing critics off his page for asking a critical question or challenging him,
No, it's remarkable. Yeah. Yeah, it's actually really scary, actually. I mean, to think the reach that guy has, and how many people he's telling this is the real facts of the case, and how many people believe it. You know, I don't know what his listenership is, but I know that there's a lot of people following him and doing all this stuff, and you know, he's like he's omitting very important salient material. 500 pages of a psych report, you know, just dismissed altogether. That was actually come up by the defense, by Eccles' defense, you know, legal team. So even that is compiled by Lax and all these other characters, and no.
Oh, it's so great though that he went immediately to Eccles, because he didn't have an opinion about the case. He ran to Eccles' house, threw off his shoes, you know, took his horrible pizza recommendation, right. But he wouldn't read your book because that would taint. You know.
I sent an email to Mike. And I know he sent it to Bruff saying, you can interview me anytime you want. I'm ready. We can talk about any subject you want. And I never heard anything back. So, you know, I made myself available. I thought Lisa O'Brien did a fantastic job, but
she was amazing.
Yes,
made it look so easy, you know. So. When it's really hard to debate with someone like that, because when you make a point, that's not favorable to the West Memphis Three, it just goes in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, it's incredible. Don't want to hear it.
He had incredible patience and tenacity. I wrote her a big note after that.
Yeah, that takes a lot of courage, so I really respect her for engaging in that conversation. I mean, I think that you're right.
He put her down like 2 episodes later, right? Didn't he make insulting comments about her 2 episodes later, as he always does, on anyone who, you know...
Oh, man, it's too much.
Who debates him.
But yeah, I mean, I think actually my respect for the legal process, actually listening through Bob Ruff, was even augmented. Like I had more respect because I realized that these are things for professionals. These are people who understand the facts. But yeah, I mean, I really think that the legal system inside, and you see the circus-like environments where they let in video things, I think it actually distracts from a very serious process that takes time, that goes through steps by professionals. I do believe that the defense has constitutional rights and is obligated to have excellent representation, and I think that the state has to follow by rules, Brady rules, things like that, to divulge all the information necessary so that a trier of fact, a judge who's been trained and been around, or a jury can make that determination. I really think that it's much better than these kind of off-the-cuff podcasts determining that they're going to actually more qualify. It seems like, at least in Bob Ruff's situation, that they seem to think they're more qualified than that process. And that's remarkable.
That's a theme with him. Even when he did that self-help podcast, it was like, let's forget the 100-year history of psychiatry, and let's just help each other as amateurs.
Right.
Because we'll do a better job.
The thing that we missed about NXIVM was this appearance of a guy by the name of Ben Zemkes, who places like all of these people together and has come public seeing Stormy Daniels, Keith Raniere, and Anthony and Huma Weiner, Abedin and Anthony Weiner, at some party in 2007 or something like that. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. Well, when the NXIVM story came out, there were a lot of kind of conspiracy outfits that were writing like the Clinton sex trafficking cult, and they were writing that I think it was Sarah Bronfman was an aide to Clinton, which was untrue. And basically all the typical cast of characters that appear as villains in the conspiracy world were linked to NXIVM because it involves sex trafficking. So recently, this self-described private citizen, Ben Shemkis, made this video saying when he was in Connecticut, he went with his girlfriend. They were hanging out in the Yale Library, and 2 women who were dressed up like they were going to a club. Like, that wouldn't draw any attention in the Yale Library. And where do you want to go when you're dressed to the nines, but the Yale Library, to go pick up strangers for your secretive A-list sex trafficking cult. Anyway, it's like this crazy story, but it became popular. He took a lie detector test. He passed. Then there were stories coming out that he was missing and feared dead. So he orchestrated his, in my opinion, he went to his relative's basement and hung out for a while and fed stories about how he was missing and dead. I mean, just talk about self myth making. It was amazing. Yeah. I just found it amusing. Yeah. And he also said that these memories of this party didn't come to him until he was watching Smallville, and then he had a flashback of these repressed NXIVM party. And Stormy Daniels was there too. Right.
I mean, you got to throw them all in there, right?
Fixates on Allison's Max shoes, and it's just a really crazy story. And I came out and I said, I don't believe it, and I also paired it with Vanessa Grigoriadis. I said, on the left, they're trying to frame it not in the context of a dangerous cult, and without that, you really lose all sense of it. And on the right, or on the, I don't even know if the right is the conspiracy. It seems to lean more right.
I would say so.
Yeah, you have these crazy imaginary stories. So it was even suggested at one point that Claire Bronfman herself was putting out this story that Stormy Daniels, because Ben Shankus didn't think of Stormy Daniels being connected. There was a picture of Stormy Daniels tattoo, and they're saying, it doesn't look like the brand. But NXIVM's about turning sort of wholesome women. It wouldn't be, Stormy Daniels would not be an interest to Keith Raniere. She has too much, personality or sense of self.
Right, interesting.
And she's highly sexualized. He was into, women he could dominate and control and really change the morality of, and even maybe the sex, just, whatever their boundaries were, to violate their boundaries in a very rapey, gross way.
Well, we have come to a full hour. Where can people find your podcast?
I'm on Spreaker, and I'm also on YouTube, Roberta Glass, all one word.
And it's True Crime Report, right? Or is it True Crime Podcast?
Yeah. I'm trying to sort of phase out. It was originally the Wolf Sheep podcast, but nobody really remembered it. Everybody just remembered my name, so I'm trying to sort of phase that out and phase my name in.
So there's a lot of material there, guys. Go check it out. Roberta Glass, True Crime Report or podcast on Spreaker and YouTube. Roberta, thank you very much for being on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.